Miles Davis was one of the best known and most influential jazz trumpeters the world has ever known. He is credited with being at the forefront of several types of jazz, modal jazz in the late 50s and early 60s, and jazz rock fusion in the late 60s and early 70s, probably the most prominent. He was active from 1944 until his death in 1991, with a short hiatus between 1975 and 1980. I think he made 56 studio albums. He also is the act with the most albums in this list of albums that I'm working from, which is a total of 21 albums in this list.
Hi, my name's Dan, and this is a review of Jack Johnson, sometimes called A Tribute to Jack Johnson by Miles Davis, which was released in 1971. And it's not my first time listening to it. In fact, it's my second time reviewing it. So before I started doing video reviews on my YouTube channel, I had a blog with a readership of about 5, and I was working through a list that I'd created of the 1,000 greatest albums of all time, not from my opinion, but from amalgamating from other lists. Now I've moved on to this Acclaimed music list, which is much better list than my list, but it's also 3 times as long. And we're just over a third of the way through. And will I ever get there to the end? We shall see. I seem to be still going. So good. All right. Right. Let's get into this album. So it's a studio album, but also a soundtrack by Miles. But that soundtrack element isn't, I don't think, hugely important here. And it's Miles and some other musicians. It's small band instrumental stuff. And I wouldn't strongly describe this as jazz. I would say this is jazz rock fusion, even jazz funk fusion at times. There are 2 long tracks, but actually, what's going on here is that there was a recording session where most of this stuff was recorded. There was a second session where a little bit of what's been used here with different musicians was done, and these are stitched together from several pieces of music to make these 2 long tracks. So if as you move from one kind of field to another, that's actually not them doing that at that point. It's a way of it kind of blending through. Mostly, so these musicians who have done most of it is mostly a roster of names that I actually know fairly well. So some of them. So we've got John McLaughlin on guitar, who went on to be Mahavishnu John McLaughlin and had quite a distinguished career in fusion. Herbie Hancock, who I understand wandered into the studio on the day they were recording, and they found him a beat-up organ to play. And again, he went in a fusion direction. And Billy Cobham on drums, who again went into a fusion direction. And so all 3 of them went on to work more with Miles Davis in a few more albums, and then seemed to kind of disperse. And it feels a bit like the thing in the Gospels with Jesus and the disciples, where he sends the disciples out and kind of just send these guys out, and they all went and spread the word of jazz fusion to the world. There's some nice bass here as well by Michael Henderson, and then the name that I don't know is Steve Grossman on soprano sax. And of course, we got Miles Davis on trumpet. So out of the 2 tracks, the first track is more rocky and upbeat. There's a long passage, which is quite funk, I would say, on one chord. And then the second track is more mellow. And it's all basically improvisation over grooves. It's very accessible, certainly if I were to compare it with other Miles Davis stuff around this time. There are some that I found very difficult, but this album I don't. And I know he was experimenting with, these the interface between rock and using Rick instruments and electric stuff and jazz. For me, this is one where he got that blend pretty much right. There are shades here, I'd say, of space rock and krautrock, and leading to ambient and even to the techno to come, just of this long evolving feels. But also it kind of harks back to long evolving jams by people like the Grateful Dead and Pink Floyd. In some ways, interesting, it feels as an album almost throwaway. And I think that's because of the improvisational nature of it. There are some very competent musicians here basically having some fun, and that's a good thing. And we get to listen in on that. Particularly features, of course, Miles Davis on trumpet, and there's some pretty good playing here. He's got a strong, piercing sound here. I quite like the tone of Miles Davis's trumpet, and it cuts through. He's got kind of a clarion call feel to it. I would say this is a good album for semi-background music. These long and fairly aimless passages, but not aimless in a bad way. Sometimes it can feel just a little bit too aimless. This kind of, it's just like, we're settled in, we're enjoying it, we're having some fun, basically. So I enjoyed it pretty well. But that's just what I think. I'd love to know what you think of this album. You may also, as people do, disagree with me on my take of other albums of this period from Miles Davis. So feel free to throw anything that you want about that. But that's it from me for now.